Good afternoon and welcome to City Club of Portland's Friday Forum. City Club is where civic-minded people come together to make Portland and Oregon a better place for everyone to live, work, and play. I'm David Thompson, treasurer of City Club. Members and guests are gathered today at Sentinel Hotel, along with all of those listening on OPB Radio, Portland Community Media, or YouTube. The generous support of City Club's corporate and media partners enables us to put on the state's best civic programs week after week. Our media partner is Oregon Business Magazine. Our current Friday Forum sponsors are AARP of Oregon, McKinley Irvin, Iberdrola Renewables, Airbnb, and Uber. Please join me in showing our appreciation for all of them. Please join us next Friday Forum on December 11th at noon for Different Challenges, Similar Solutions, when four West Coast mayors, that's right, four West Coast mayors will be here on stage from San Francisco, Los Angeles, Eugene, and our own Portland Mayor Hales to talk about local regional solutions from climate change to homelessness, among other topics. You can learn more about City Club events, purchase tickets, and become a member on our website, pdxclub.org. And now for today's program. A new wave of conservative leaders is breaking through traditional stereotypes. And while we each fall at different places on the political spectrum, some more distinctly than others, we have one major thing in common. We are all Oregonians. New voices like the ones we'll hear from today will have an impact on state policy decisions and election results in the months and years ahead, which will affect us all. I'm pleased to welcome award-winning journalist Michelle Cole to serve as moderator. Along with Michelle, we have three dynamic Oregonians taking a new approach to Republican politics. John Davis, State Representative of Wilsonville. Go ahead. Julia RABADI, Chair of the Young Republican Federation of Oregon. And Ben West, one of the plaintiffs who sued to overturn Oregon's gay marriage ban. Our moderator, Michelle Cole, will introduce them more fully after I make a few more brief comments. Michelle Cole is Principal and Director of Content and Research for Gallatin Public Affairs. Dubbed the Investigator, she is a highly skilled researcher, writer, and communications strategist. With more than 20 years of experience covering Northwest issues, governments, leaders, and politics, her knowledge of regional public policy landscape is vast. Prior to joining Gallatin, Michelle served as the Capitol Bureau Chief of the Oregonian, where she reported on Oregon legislature, state government, and politics. While there, her reporting led to the policy changes in the state's child welfare system. Thank you. Please join me in welcoming today's guests.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. I think we'll have a really interesting conversation. I want to start just by introducing a little more fully the members of our panel. The three of them are Republicans. I think they haven't always been Republicans, or some of them haven't always been Republicans, but they bring new and interesting perspectives to the party. Representative John Davis was the youngest member of the Oregon legislature when he was elected to the House in 2012. Parenthetically, his predecessor dropped off the ballot after a sex scandal, which I didn't cover that one. Davis represents Wilsonville, Sherwood, King City, Hillsborough, Tigard, Beaverton, and Aloha. In 2014, the Oregonian endorsed his re-election saying, quote, "He sets the mold for the type of candidate that the GOP needs to develop in the Portland area if it wants to remain relevant." Hopefully the Oregonian will remain relevant as well. I am, sorry, I couldn't help myself. I am particularly impressed that he dedicated a year of service following his graduation from George Fox University to the AmeriCorps Vista program, during which he served as activities director for the Police Activities League in rural Southern California. Julia RABADI chairs the Young Republicans of Oregon, which means she devotes a lot of her time and energy to encouraging young people to become involved in politics so that they can influence elections and policy decisions. She is also a board member for both the Dorchester Conference and the Oregon League of Minority Voters. Rabadi was raised by immigrant parents who urged her to embrace the American dream. Like all good Americans, she appreciates a well-crafted beer. Her bio says that she proudly resides in the world's greatest beer city, Portland, Oregon. Ben West is a political activist and community advocate. Many of you may have heard his name when he and his partner became one of the plaintiff couples challenging the state of Oregon in Rummel v. Kitzhaber. That case and their work challenged the ban on same-sex marriage, which the court ruled to be unconstitutional. West also appeared on a television ad for Republican U.S. Senate candidate Monica Webby. I personally applaud Ben for stepping up as a therapeutic foster care provider, taking care of some of the most vulnerable residents of our state. So, for those of us just tuning in on OPB, I'd like to welcome you and say that I'm Michelle Cole, here with State Representative John Davis, Julia Rabadi, Ben West at the City Club of Portland's Friday Forum. So let's start the questioning. I'm going to start with you, John Davis, but invite the others to chime in. The 2016 elections have the potential to transform Oregon here statewide. We've got open seats for governor, secretary of state, treasurer, yet so far, I don't think I'm exaggerating, there really are no Republicans that people are excited about who are stepping in. Where are the new faces that should be generating excitement?
It's a great question. The reality is the challenge as a Republican looking to run statewide is convincing oneself that you will be the first to succeed after 20 years of failure. And that is a significant hurdle to get over. At the same time, I would challenge the assertion that there's nobody looking to run who is not interesting or exciting. I look at somebody like Dennis Richardson, who comes off of a gubernatorial campaign, and rather than saying, I'm done with my public service, says I want to devote time to investigating public records and using the power of the Secretary of State's office to audit and investigate state agencies. Or someone like Sid Lycan, who's challenging former Representative Dennis Richardson, who has a very long and esteemed service as a county commissioner. Now, these are not celebrities. They're not statewide office holders. They would like to be. But I would challenge the assertion that there's nobody jumping into the race who is either qualified or interesting, because those two right there, in addition to the possibilities of an Alan Alley, who has run many times, who served in the governor's office previously, and others running for state office, including for treasurer and other seats. I think there are some great candidates out there who are jumping into the mix. Now, the challenge in 2016 is for the general public. It's about the presidential election. How do you distinguish yourself as a gubernatorial candidate or as a third-tier candidate on the statewide level running for Attorney General or Secretary of State, and how do you break through the noise? Because the reality is most people are focusing on the presidential race. That is a challenge, in particular in a state that does not currently have any statewide Republicans.
Julia or Ben, how do you feel about the choices so far in the statewide elections?
Statewide elections, I agree with a lot of what John had to say, but so far in terms of getting younger Republicans excited about the upcoming races, I think they would be if we weren't so discouraged at this point, just based on past Republican races, and slightly frustrated about how our party acts during elections. I think we would be a lot more excited about our current candidates if it weren't for those few factors.
Ben?
So I'm a fourth-generation Oregonian, and this state has been dominated blue for so long that it's really hard to get your voice heard out there and even have a forums like this are excellent because you're getting to hear some new voices, maybe because the dominant voice is of one side of the party, and it's hard to break through that. And so once again, I reiterate what John said, is that when you face the gauntlet of overcoming the mountain, and you only hear one loud voice, it's hard to break through to make sure that your message that could be very beneficial to all Oregonians breaks through and is heard.
So Julia, I read in a blog post where you wrote of the fuddy-duddy conservative image of the Republican Party. I think that was 5 years ago, to be fair. Do you still think that's true? And then talk about why you identify as a Republican.
I think that's the stereotype of what a Republican is. I've certainly met people who didn't fit that mold. There's plenty that don't. I identify as a Republican pretty much because of my parents. They really molded my political identity. I grew up with parents that came from Jordan. My dad came with nothing and was able to build an entire life for him and his 10 siblings and his parents. And I grew up hearing about the American dream, and he worked his way up to being a small business owner and hearing about the challenges he faced and how this is the one country you could be that kind of success in. I mean, growing up and listening to both sides of the aisle, those kind of beliefs resonated more with the Republican Party. So even though we didn't fit the typical Republican family, we certainly identify them because they believe the same things that we did.
Ben, you don't look like a fuddy-duddy either. What makes you a Republican?
I'm a Republican because I believe that every American and every person that lives in this state has great potential and is a great person and has greatness within them. And I believe the ideals of my party can help bring that potential out of people to be the best that they can be. And if that means owning your own business one day, becoming a doctor, becoming president of the United States, I believe that the policies of the party help raise all boats to the top. The tide will raise all boats. So my goal as a Republican is to help my neighbor become better and their family grow and become better, and that's why I'm Republican.
I'm going to throw the question also to John Davis to talk a little bit. I think you have some Democrats in your family.
I do. I come from a family of staunch Democrats. I'm one of probably 2 or 3 Republicans they admit to liking, and I'm still invited around the Thanksgiving.
Yeah, tell us what Thanksgiving was like.
But I've gone through the experience of growing up as a Democrat, being registered as an independent, and now being registered as a Republican. And so the journey for me, I look backwards in time at some of the luminaries in Republican politics. We look at Lincoln, we look at Eisenhower, we look at Teddy Roosevelt, we look at Ronald Reagan as some of our archetypes for people who have served the party and served the country for substantial change for the better. We look at where we are today, and despite the noise of the election cycle, we have an incredible diversity within the Republican Party of views on everything from social issues to economic issues in a way that my experience at the Capitol and my experience looking at the media, my friends on the other side of the aisle don't seem to have the similar diversity in their viewpoints within the party. And that's counterintuitive because there's sort of this archetype thrown out there as the closed-minded Republican. But man, when I'm in a caucus room with my colleagues, or when I'm in a debate, or when I'm in a room of Republicans in King City in my district, it's a pretty lively crowd with an incredibly diverse set of viewpoints.
Can you give us an example of maybe one of those lively discussions inside your caucus?
Oh, absolutely. I'll give it more broadly for those in a local Republican club. I'll just talk about the issue of immigration, or we'll talk about Syrian refugees. I mean, I come from a perspective as a person of faith, as a person who is very supportive of the legal doctrine of refugees as being central to who we are as a nation, and I've been incredibly dismayed at some of what members of my party have said about it. At the same time, there are those who stand very strongly for the view of refugees and immigration. And we see a very vigorous and, I think, healthy debate within our party about the issues of immigration and refugees.
Okay. Let's see. Julia or Ben, have your friends or people your age given you a hard time because of your politics? I think Julia, and I see Ben raising his mic too. So whichever one wants to go first, talk a little bit about where it's hit home for you.
Well, I think if you're a Republican in Oregon, you've lost at least one friend through the various conversations that you've had. My worst experiences are probably from college, where you are you're a minority regardless, but you're a minority at PSU, which is where I went to school. There's so many examples I could give, unfortunately. But I'm sorry,
No,
lost
that's
my train
okay.
of thought. Would you
Ben,
mind?
you were taken to task by Blue Oregon. I know you've got probably some examples to talk about where it's become very personal.
Yeah, there were a few media outlets that were that took me to task for our very public lawsuit to legalize same-sex marriage, which I'm very proud of, and then my stance to endorse Monica Webby for Senate. Now, if you know anything about me, and I have some old friends here that I haven't seen in forever, that they know that I'm a fiercely independent individual, and I kind of beat to my own drum a little bit, and I'm proud of that. And I stood up for my convictions at that time, and sometimes when you do that, you're going to get a little bit of backlash, and that's just how it is. But there were people in my community that were shocked, in the gay and lesbian community, that were just shocked and really had a hard time with me understanding, like, well, how could you do this, or how could you, how dare you, be a Republican or even endorse somebody publicly? And I would say to them is that my viewpoints as a gay man go much more beyond, me being a gay man. My viewpoints are me as an Oregonian and American. I pay taxes, and I have a kid in school, and I, have issues with civic issues that everybody else deals with day to day. And so I made a decision to stand up for who I thought would be the best for Oregon. And sometimes that wasn't very popular, and there was some backlash with my community.
Okay. Julia.
Back on track now. My time at PSU really showed me just how Republicans are treated in this state, or really on college campuses. The worst experiences are when your friends of color find out that you're a Republican, and also when some of the Democrats there on campus found out you're a Republican and a person of color. Because to be a person of color and a Republican is just, it's a no-no to them. And it's unfortunately cost me several friends that they just, they want me to follow what the stereotype is, which is ironic on their part. And also dealing with professors. There are so many stories from my group, from the college Republicans during that time, where they were graded down on papers, or they were singled out in class and for having a conservative viewpoint, and having events. You have no advocate, really, and even in Portland, both on school and just in the city, it's not a welcomed viewpoint, which is unfortunate, because this is a city that prides itself on being open-minded and accepting of everything. Apparently, just not being a Republican.
For those of us just tuning in on OBB, I'm Michelle Cole, here with State Representative John Davis, Julia RABADI, and Ben West at the City Club of Portland's Friday Forum. The two most respected, if not revered, Oregon Republicans in memory, at least who I heard the most about since I moved to the state, are Tom McCall and Mark Hatfield. I'd like to hear from each of you whether you think McCall and Hatfield and their political philosophy fits with today's GOP in this state. And let's start with Ben.
We have a history in the GOP, those leaders specifically, of really getting a job done. And they really represented in Washington, Hatfield and even Packwood, they were very powerful advocates for the state of Oregon, and a lot of effective great change happened because of their leadership in Oregon. And now we currently have a climate where it's a one-party kind of state, And so a lot of those great ideas and that great leadership that those men had aren't coming out any longer from our party, or the voices are silent or just not heard. And even Vic Atia, as a governor, was a very respected leader in our state. And hopefully, and my goal is to see the Republican Party again begin to have influence like that again in our state and to bring effective change to our state.
John, if those two were rising young politicians today, would they be Republicans?
Well, I would never underestimate the power of both personality and relationships. And my understanding, although I didn't know either of them personally, is that they valued both significantly. They valued speaking in a positive way about what they could do for the state of Oregon. And they valued even their political enemies. One of my favorite stories, which may be apocryphal, of Mark Hatfield is that upon winning, within a week of winning, he would bring in the organizations who did not endorse him in that election, and even those who were his direct opponents in the election, and talk about ways that they could work together in the following election cycle. I think beyond party, and there are examples in many states, beyond party, those characteristics are going to cut through what we often see on the surface as very caustic and very partisan politics. And Ben's point about the ability to simply get things done is attractive to those on either end and in the middle of the political spectrum. Those are qualities that both Tom McCall and Mark Hatfield had that I think would endure even today.
Julia, do young people know, revere, have they ever heard of McCall and Hatfield?
I would certainly hope that they would have at least heard of them, but I can't recall a single conversation I've ever had about either one of them with another young Republican. They're just distant memories, and unfortunately, all we know is one-party rule. But I would certainly hope that in today's party they would be welcomed, because they certainly appeal to both sides.
Okay. John Davis, why should voters elect someone like you who's going to be part of a minority caucus? Wouldn't you be more effective if you were in the majority caucus room?
And thanks for the question. There are those who have run in Republican districts as Democrats and in Democratic districts as Republicans in other states who've simply run on the platform of, hey, even though you're a Republican district, get me in because I'm a Democrat and at least the caucus will listen to me because I'll be in the majority. And I'll go back to my answer to the last question, which is I feel as though I've been able to make an impact in the Oregon legislature and in the political process more generally, even in the minority, that for those who are willing to analyze issues in a serious way, to address problems in a meaningful way, and to work with those who they may not agree with, that is respected still to this day in the Oregon legislature and in the political process. Do you get the pure victory you want? No, you don't. Do you get more victories than you would like to get? No, you get less. But you can still be effective, and most importantly, I think I continue to do the job of representing my constituents in how I presented myself as being elected.
Ben, you look like you had something to say.
Yeah, I mean, it's obvious that it's tough to be a Republican in our state, but at the same time, Republicans have to be held accountable that they need to sell their brand, bring a vision that is palatable to the people. And we have to be held accountable for that too, is that we need to come in a new way, in a new direction with a vision that's able to lead. And if that happens, it's going to grab a hold of people, and people are going to begin to stand up and say, that's what I want, I identify with that. I don't really care if he has an R or D in front of his name. That man's a leader, or that woman's a leader, and I'm identifying with what they're saying. And it isn't always R&D. Sometimes it's just about getting that message out in a meaningful way and then standing behind your convictions and then going from there.
Let's talk a little bit about the Republican Party brand nationally and how it affects Oregon. There's no shortage of primary presidential candidates. Each seems to appeal to his or her own narrow constituency. How does what's going on nationally, do you think, affect or reverberate back here in Oregon? And I put jump ball here on my list of questions, so whoever would like to take it first. Come on. All right, John.
The challenge is that, as I said earlier, what's happening on the national level with Republicans is what's going to be the first thing on the mind of any Oregonian you talk to. And we often in the legislature, we like to distinguish and say, well, this is the House Republican position and proposal on the issue. Here's the Senate Republican proposal. Here's the proposal from the Secretary of State Republican nominee. Listen, people don't care which little corner of the Oregon Republican Party you're coming from with your proposal. They simply think that's the Republican proposal. And so that's a challenge. At the same time, there is I think, common stream of thought that, man, look how terrible the Republicans are getting hammered across the country. I mean, they only have the largest majority they've ever had in the House of Representatives and almost in the Senate, and more gubernatorial seats than they've ever had and more legislative seats than they've ever had. And I think that is in part because of the perspective of some in the popular media. But you have to look at the current environment nationally and say, actually, the Republicans and the Republican Party are surging. That does have complicating factors in Oregon, though, simply because of the politics that we have. And we deal with on a daily basis, both in the legislature and in the election cycle, dealing with some of the baggage from, frankly, the success that may not work in similar ways in other states.
So do you think it'll have bring fewer or more voters out in Oregon for some of these important statewide seats?
I think it's too early to tell in Oregon. I think it depends on, most importantly, who the presidential nominee will be, which ballot measures are going to be run, and how much is spent on those ballot measures. And then, of course, who is in those statewide seats for elected office. But those first two make a huge difference, and we don't know what they're going to be yet.
Ben?
I think it's no coincidence that a lot of the people on the GOP presidential candidate are outsiders. And those outsiders are striking a nerve with the common man, and even Bernie Sanders on the other side. There's a nerve being struck that says the status quo is not working, it's broken, and for the first time, the next generation doesn't think they're going to be better off than the previous generation. For the first time, and that's sad, that's not American. And so that nerve is struck with people, and so that is kind of causing a grassroots kind of swell happening, and that's why you're seeing all these different candidates kind of get some traction. And I think the same thing can happen in Oregon. If that person leaves with a visionary, quality agenda that's good for Oregon, I think they can get that same substance and traction.
Julia, talk a little bit about young people, because the success of many of the state and local races sometimes are getting those young foot soldiers out. How does what's going on nationally, are they excited about it, about what's going on in your party? How does that reverberate down here in Oregon?
In terms of young people getting excited about the current candidates, I mean, everyone's pretty terrified about Trump, to be honest. At least everyone I've talked to. Excuse me. But I think there are a lot of candidates that they are excited about. That is kind of energizing them in Oregon a little bit. I mean, you have a ton of younger people for Jeb and Rubio and Rand Paul, and they're definitely ones to watch out for. But in terms of getting them excited enough to help out in local races here, no one's really doing that. And I think it's mainly because Trump's just been the focus of everything.
Okay. So are the three of you outliers among Oregon Republicans, or are there more out there like you, and what's it going to take to get them engaged? Ben, you.
No, I don't think we're outliers. I can't tell you how many people in my own community come and say, hey, thank you for being brave enough to be a voice, or I don't think we have a history of, I think we have a history of a big tent inclusionary party. We're the party of the abolitionists. We're the party of anti-segregation. We're the party of that is all about the American dream growing and expanding and being available to all people and ratcheting back the burden of government. And I think that message is still true today. And I think that we have a very diverse party. I mean, there is a stereotype that everybody in the party looks exactly like my father. That's the stereotype. But the truth is that we represent all people in all lifespans throughout America. And I think that when we break down that stereotype and we begin to say, hey, it's not exactly what I've been told or force-fed, there might be a good idea there, then that's when things start to open up.
John or Julia, what's it going to take?
Yeah, politics is relational. politics is about people. We talk about ideas, policies, this sort of thing, but at the heart of it, people are involved in political movements and people are involved in running for office because they are drawn to those, and they're drawn to the idea of service, and they're drawn to a group that will help them. And I'm excited about the group that I see out there currently running for office, that I see out there serving in the Oregon legislature. I enjoy being a part of it. I'm excited about those who are coming up behind me and those who are in front of me. And unless you're excited about the group of people with whom you serve, you don't want to serve. You're not going to go to be a part of any organization where you say, well, I agree with their ideals, but I don't like any of these people. You have to enjoy them and first start in politics with relationships and with a group of people who want to be together. And I see that in the Oregon Republican Party.
Julia, how, because this is what you do, how do you get young people, first of all, to even consider being Republican and then to engage being Republican? What's working or what doesn't work?
That's definitely one of the hardest things to do, is just to get young people engaged in politics regardless of party. But to really get them engaged in Republican politics, you have to find that common ground. One of my other young Republicans and I, we went to a Young Dems meeting one time, and just over a beer, I mean, we agreed on 80% of everything that we talked about. And I mean, they now come to our events, and it's been really nice just having that camaraderie. But in terms of getting other younger Republicans involved in the party, I mean, making it personal. I mean, showing them like, hey, bringing them to really cool conferences works too.
What would be some of the issues that you think would engage young Republicans? And I'll let any of you speak to that as well.
Well, anything that affects their ability to pay their rent is always a good one to start out with. Social issues don't work with young people. If anything, it turns them off. But really, fiscal issues, surprisingly, have been a good one.
Do you think if the minimum wage were on the ballot, that would be an issue that would bring out young Republicans? And I see you, Ben. I'm just going to let you, Julia, answer that.
I think that issue would bring out young people on any side, really. I mean, that's an issue that a lot of people are passionate about. It affects so many.
Yeah, the minimum wage is one that would bring them out, and so is affordable college and college tuition, and the outrageous burden that we've put on the shoulders of young people right when they're trying to start that life and get running. We just put like sandbags on them and weigh them down and drop them back to their knees. So I think those two issues are things that really start to kind of draw the interest of young people.
John, economic issues in the State House, I've typically seen break down. The Republicans talk about helping growing small business, and the Democrats talk about some of the issues, the wage issues, that minimum wage or those kind of issues. Is there a common area if economics is a concern for everyone? Where do you see overlap?
Well, there is broad agreement about the need for additional development and infrastructure in the state. Then the next question is, how do you pay for it? And that's where things tend to break down. But there's broad agreement that public spending on infrastructure is incredibly important. I think there is a common ground of we need to support small business owners and new and young employers. We tend to break down in how those policies fall out. But I found that there is a remarkable contiguity between Republicans and Democrats in their overall goal for the state. There's a breakdown in the particular policies that get us there, but in Oregon, we at least continue to have the conversation. We at least continue to meet in the same room and don't throw things at each other. And that is a particularly Oregon sort of political debate. I'm glad it's continuing. I think it's breaking down at the edges. It's breaking down in a couple of core areas as well. But I still have hope.
For those of us just tuning in on OPB, I'm Michelle Cole, here with State Representative John Davis, Julia Rabadi, and Ben West at City Club of Portland's Friday Forum. Let's see. Ben West, what's an issue here in this state that you'd like for the 2016 candidates to talk about and fear that they won't?
I would like them to talk about, there's a couple issues, so I have to narrow one down. But I think it'd be great to talk about jobs in Oregon and the lack of quality middle-class paying jobs that allow people to get out of the minimum wage realm and into a realm where they can maybe buy that first house, or that they can afford to take a vacation, or that they don't have to necessarily worry about every single cent that walks out that door in a way that they have to, in a fearful way. And I want to see us talk about ways to do that without the overreach and the dominance of more regulation and more government, and how we can get small business, that economic engine, to really grow and explode. And another quick issue I want them to talk about is, I really feel like that often the most vulnerable of our populations, foster children and children in this system, are forgotten, not cared for, and don't receive what they need to be able to come out of that situation into a place where they're able to grow and heal. And often they just get forgotten, and I don't think that we go back and remember that we need to go back and make sure that the most vulnerable in our populations are taken care of first.
Julia or John, are there issues that you fear won't be addressed in this next election?
I don't think there are issues that won't be addressed, but one that I really want them to focus on is, like what Ben said, jobs. Just because so many young people, I mean, there's a huge unemployment with young people, or they're having to take jobs that have nothing to do with what they prepared for in school. So that, I mean, that would be my focus.
John?
Leading with issues that affect people, not just ideas or the economy generally, but people who are having trouble finding a job, affordable housing, and not just low-income housing, but affordable housing for the middle class, youth unemployment, which is an enormous burden that's going to be coming on our society, and the fact that we have essentially 50% youth unemployment, where it used to be around 20%. These are the issues, I think, that affect people where they are, and we often, as Republicans, gravitate to large macroeconomic problems. Even the PERS discussion, for example, which is a real issue, and it's going to have significant consequences for the next 20 years of Oregon's budget. But unless we distill that down to the effect on your child in your school and the level of public service that you're receiving and the traffic that you sit in, it's not going to be effective. So distilling issues to how they affect individual Oregonians is where I think Republican candidates need to change their narrative.
This is a question for whoever wants to go first, do you honestly believe that we have a two-party checks and balances system today, and what would make it stronger? Here in Oregon, now. Keep on the state. John?
My experience in the state legislature tells me that we currently do not. We have a single party controlling all statewide offices that by virtue of that controls every state agency, and controlled and overseen by a legislature that's ruled by one party. Nobody should look at this situation, Republican or Democrat, and say it's going to foster great government, accountable government, and wise spending of your tax dollars, because it doesn't, and I would hope everybody who looks at the situation objectively will say that. And those of us who are Republicans should honestly say that about states that are a single-party rule on the Republican side. So we don't have balance in the state. And I think it's one of the greatest things that we can argue for, is accountability and balance, and translating that into how that actually affects the everyday life and the services and the day-to-day life of Oregonians.
Ben?
Yeah, our founders set up a system with important balance and checks within it. And in Oregon, we haven't had that for decades. It's not just now in the state office. It's been a long time. And when that happens, that power begins to grow, like John said, and then there's no accountability. And one of the biggest issues facing Oregon right now is accountability in the state office and the embarrassment that we faced as a state through the last governor. And I would not be surprised, and I don't know, but I would not be surprised if that is a more systemic ethics issue in the government, and it almost like we allowed an environment to be created where something like that could foster. It's almost like it started off small, and it could happen on either side, and that begin to grow and grow and grow, that infection. And you can, like John said, there is no like iron sharpening iron. There is no checks and balances. There is nothing to buffet saying, you've gone too far, that's an overreach, that's not okay.
So one could submit that the minority party has a role and maybe a responsibility that they're not fulfilling as well. What does the minority party, Republican Party, need to do to strengthen those checks and balances?
One of my favorite concepts is the idea of the faithful minority, that even in the minority in the legislature, even in a minority position in a state, we have a duty, a civic duty, to serve our office well and to call out those in power who are abusing that power. And that is something that often those who are in the minority get into a Stockholm mentality, right? Well, we're just going to be here. This is just where we are forever in the minority. We can't do anything. You know, I'm not going to submit that bill. I'm not going to submit that press release. I'm not going to submit that public records request because it's not going to make a difference. No, we have a duty to be faithful to our constituents and to the state to serve the office. And unless we take that seriously, and unless sufficient time and energy is devoted to it, and it's easy not to, frankly, in the minority, because you're not a committee chair, you're not the governor, you're not an agency head, because generally Republicans aren't appointed to those positions. So it's easy to, I think, go derelict in our duty.
Mm-hmm. So do you go into this election year, and any of the three of you, optimistic? I mean, anybody want to give any odds on your party gaining some seats, either in the legislature or maybe one of those statewide? Kind of give me a read on your mood. Ben?
I mean, nationally, I'm hopeful. In Oregon, I'm hopeful. And I'll be honest, I love the process. I love being involved any way I can. And it's an honor to even get out there and vote and to speak your mind and to try to bring effective change with integrity. And I am hopeful. I mean, it's still early. We can still see people emerge, like what John said, qualified people with good solutions. And I don't always need somebody to be a reality TV star to get our attention. I need somebody with vision and leadership to get out there and just say, this is what we can do. Grab a hold of my hand. Let's get this done together. And I know that there are a lot of people, young and old, in our state that are just waiting for a quality leader to just kind of grab a hold of them. Almost the way, and this can be sometimes a cliche, but almost the way Reagan shook the nation in the late 70s, early 80s, and began to go against status quo and say, we can do this, we can change things. And I'm hoping for that for Oregon this year, in this election cycle too.
Julia?
I'd have to agree with Ben. I'm speaking on just the general perspective of people in our group, but they are hopeful on a national level, despite what the current trends say. And then on a local level, on a statewide level, excuse me, I think they are waiting for that one leader that'll come and push them to be more engaged in politics. But they are hopeful for the candidates that we have running now. I think we have a great group.
John, where's that leader?
Well, I'll remind folks that even in the metro area, among county commissions, local boards and commissions, city councils, they are the majority controlled by those who are registered as Republicans, except for a few exceptions to that. The difference being that you don't have to put a D, I, or R behind your name on the ballot in many of those districts and counties. So based on the local success that we see, based on, I think, the movement that we're going to have on ballot measures, and based on the open seats we see in the legislature, I think we'll have success in 2016.
Okay. For those of us just tuning in, we're on OPB. I'm Michelle Cole here with State Representative John Davis, Julia RABADI, and Ben West at City Club of Portland's Friday Forum. We are now going to open up to audience Q&A portion of the program. If you have a written question on an index card, please hold it up high so that City Club staff can collect it from you. As always, we invite members to the microphone to ask their question. Asking questions at the Friday Forum microphone is a benefit of City Club membership, and membership is open to everyone. Before asking your question, please do us a favor, identify yourself as a City Club member. Ask your question in 30 seconds or less. Also, I will read at least one index card question. And I believe the first question is posed by a Madison High School student.
Oh, hi, my name is Nima Osman and I attend Madison High School, and this question is for Don Davis. As a Republican, how do you think we can restructure our police system so that they serve our communities rather than hurt them?
Thanks very much for the question. Thanks very much for being here and for the work that all of you are doing. Accountability is incredibly important and probably near the top of the priorities for Republicans. And accountability for every government agency, including the police, is paramount. What that looks like in the particular instance of a local police force is hard for me to say. And it's not something that I think I can specifically address. But accountability and what many see as the lack thereof is, I think, important and what we need to aim for.
Ted Kay, City Club member. Before I ask my question, I'd like us to recognize longtime City Club member and former U.S. Senator Bob Packwood, who's here with us today. And now my question. Put yourself into the future 20 years where Oregon is a red state. What's the tipping point that would change it from blue to red? Question for each of you.
Ben?
Looking into the future, I think that it could be a couple things. It can be the economic and status of the state, where you have high density, no affordable housing, and no jobs, and a lack of prospects for young people. I think those are things that can begin to tip the scale towards fresh new ideas when it affects people's pocketbooks every day and how they live, and the status quo just isn't getting it done.
I'm gonna have to agree with most of that. I think the tipping point would be concerning fiscal issues and the housing, because housing in Portland is ridiculous.
I think the tipping point will be the first statewide elected Republican. And that's important not just as a platitude, but because with a statewide Republican comes a level of structure, both to the party and the organization of Republicans, that is not possible without that. So whenever that first one gets over the hump, you're going to see, I think, a movement more broadly among statewide offices and in the legislature, which in fact is what we've seen happen in the state of Washington, which right now is 1 seat away in the Washington House from a Republican majority, and there's a 2-seat Republican majority in the Senate, and we've had 2 or 3 governor's races that have become incredibly close recently.
Bill Dickey, City Club member. I seem to remember when the pendulum was at the other end and Oregon was a red state, when Senator Packwood, Senator Hatfield, Governor McCall were all Republicans. So the pendulum swings back and forth, and who knows when. In fact, I think I got invited to the Nixon inaugural as a young Republican from Medford, Oregon in 1972. I may be the bellwether because now I'm a Democrat. But anyway, my question to you is, when I oftentimes think why it is that people in the middle of the country have such a different philosophy than I do. I mean, when it amazes me. I think, why do these people not like the way things are going, and what makes them seem so different? So I guess that's my question to you. Why do you think those people in the from Madras East and the Appalachian Mountains West, what's the difference?
Ben looks ready to answer that.
I feel like it's kind of loaded. I feel like most of the state feels disenfranchised from the northwest part of the state, that the major part of the population does not have a reality check on what it takes to be a farmer in Bend or in Madras or in these other communities. And so sometimes I feel like that they feel like they are literally 2 separate states. And to the point where we have counties going literally bankrupt and cannot survive in our state. And they feel just kind of pushed aside. And so on a state level, I think you're also talking about on a national level, that we haven't been able to come together and sometimes even they hear the plea or the cause of the more red parts of the state and the issues that they have. And there hasn't been an open conversation about what can we do or how can we do it, that a lot of policy is driven out of the major population centers.
I honestly haven't had too much.
Julia?
I honestly haven't had too much experience with this. Just the two, like Ben said, there's two different states in Oregon, essentially. But I think there definitely needs to be an open dialogue between both those states because they both have different priorities, and we should consider both of them.
Muriel Lezak, City Club member. I would be interested in hearing from each of you whether or not you support Paul Ryan's agenda to get rid of our national health care system and to stop public funding for Planned Parenthood. And if you don't agree with Paul Ryan, I'd like to hear why not.
Go ahead, John.
Thank you. As a state legislator, I have not had the opportunity to review all of Speaker Ryan's plan, which is the truth. I am very troubled by the prospect of an organization not following the law as it comes to the use of fetal tissue and aborted fetuses. To the extent they're not following federal or state law, their funding should be pulled.
I'm just starting to get into my career as a nurse, and I'm just about to graduate nursing school. I'm on the cusp, so I'm very excited about that. And I believe my code of ethics as a person and as a nurse, the news that has come out about Planned Parenthood troubles me. And I believe that we should not necessarily always funnel every federal dollar to one specific organization that provides some of the care, but there are so many community health centers throughout our nation that can give more access to all those women that aren't necessarily tied to potential legal use of fetal tissue.
I mean,
Julia?
I'd personally not like to comment on the Planned Parenthood thing, but I also haven't read or know the exact details of Paul Ryan's plan either.
So let me read another issue that's just as controversial and in the news from our audience. For better or worse, Republicans have a reputation for being firmly anti-gun control. In light of the recent events at UCC in Colorado and San Bernardino, can each of you talk about your own views about what to do about these violent crimes, which many feel result from lack of gun control laws? How will the Oregon Republican Party address this in the session? Ben?
Our founders were incredibly clear that the purpose of natural law is where our inalienable rights come from. And they wrote into the very Bill of Rights, the Second Amendment, for this reason, is that your right to self-preservation. And it's not an issue of legal gun owners that we have an issue here. We have an issue of, it's a multifaceted issue. We have issue with Islamic terrorism. We have an issue with mental health that's not treated or handled properly within our nation that we need to tackle. But it's not an issue of legal gun owners. And legal gun owners are not the problem. But often we politicize and demonize them for them acting on the very same Bill of Rights that gives you the right to have free speech, or gives you the right to the Fifth Amendment, or gives you right to due process and those things. And so I think that we need to be careful not to take tragedies that were done in San Bernardino, especially a terrorist act, and begin to demonize legal gun owners that are your neighbors, and that the majority of, like overwhelming majority of, legally and law-abiding use, practice, and use by firearms. And I think that we really run a slippery slope of demonizing, polarizing each other when you start pointing fingers at your neighbors and saying they're responsible for these type of acts.
Julia or John?
I think there's a disconnect between why, the belief why these events happen. I mean, one side thinks it's because of easy access to guns, and the other side believes it's just on an individual basis, this person is going to do it regardless of any access to guns. Like what Ben said, I mean, every tragedy like this is politicized, and gun owners are demonized. I mean, I am a gun owner. I have my concealed carry. I think it makes me feel absolutely safe when I'm walking by myself or every day. I shouldn't have to be demonized for what this one individual did, and the government just uses any excuse for these gun control.
So, John, is there any role or any responsibility or any response that the Oregon legislature needs to do?
This is certainly one of the most troubling and vexing issues as a policymaker, when we see violence, and particularly violence perpetrated on a mass level with guns. The reaction initially is, we got to do something, and it's got to be about the guns and taking those away. And looking at the reality of the fact that we have somewhere in the range of 300 million weapons in distribution in the United States already, and there's no constitutional way that those will ever be taken away from law-abiding gun owners. That's reality number one. Reality number two is the fact that gun violence and violence more generally has dropped by substantial percentage points in the range of 42, 43% in the last 15 years. That doesn't diminish the fact that there are significant and horrible events of violence occurring. Where I see the Oregon legislature can be helpful is addressing mental health gaps in our system and in our communities, and identifying those who are at the highest risk of perpetrating these crimes. Helping those, in particular, those who would be suicidal, to address their use of weapons that can make that suicide easier, and also removing weapons from those who would perpetrate domestic violence and have perpetrated domestic violence. Those are the three areas where I think we can make a meaningful difference in reducing violence in our society.
I think we have time for one more question from the floor.
Fred Mathis, City Club member, lifelong Republican who voted for Tom Dewey. My question is this: when, in your considered opinion, will we present candidates to the people who want to do things rather than undo things? And I'm speaking of a gas tax, I'm speaking of the Electoral College, and I am speaking of...
We have one more minute, so I'm going to give each of you a 30 seconds, which is a minute and a half to answer, and then we'll have to be close.
That's a big question, but I appreciate it. But I do think that, once again, and I've said this earlier, is that to bring effective change, it takes somebody with a backbone to bring a vision that isn't always popular, but is able to articulate it in a way that that's able to touch the people, and those people grab a hold of it also. And I hope to see Oregon change for the better. I want to see this state and this nation better for my son than it was for me. And I'm really excited to be part of the process.
I'm afraid our time's up.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to adjourn us for today. We've run out of broadcast time for further questions, and we'll have to stop. Please join me in thanking the staff here at the Sentinel, our fantastic staff at the City Club, Rebecca Tweed for putting on today's program from the Friday Forum Committee, and our fabulous guests. We are adjourned.